They lived in palaces, the safest places on earth, protected by walls, protected by guards, protected by tradition. And still, they were eliminated, not for treason, not for rebellion, but for knowing too much. They advised kings, controlled access, shaped decisions that rewrote history. No crowns, no titles, no protection. Because inside a palace, power is temporary, and permission can be revoked. The moment a woman stopped being useful, the palace corrected the mistake. This isn't a story about royalty. It's about women who held power quietly and what power does to them when it feels threatened. Let me tell you about a woman who never raised her voice, never led an army, never signed a decree in her own name, and still managed to terrify an entire empire for 30 years. Her name was Dou, and if you're waiting for the moment she seized power, you've already missed it. Han Dynasty China, 2nd century BCE. Dou enters the palace the way most women did, as a concubine, forgettable, replaceable, one face among hundreds. But here's what the records don't say loudly. She was literate, not just in poetry, in philosophy, in the Taoist texts that would become her weapon. When Emperor Wen chose her as consort, the court saw a promotion. What they didn't see was the apprenticeship. Dou didn't give orders. She asked questions. What does the Tao Te Ching teach about governing without interference? Shouldn't the empire reflect the natural order? It sounds harmless, academic even, but listen to what she's actually doing. She's rewriting the language of power. Because in a Confucian court, where hierarchy is everything, Taoism is a virus. It says the best ruler is the one you don't notice. It says interference creates chaos. It says step back. And suddenly, every minister who wanted to expand the bureaucracy, every general pushing for war, every Confucian scholar demanding rigid order, they're not just wrong, they're unnatural. When Emperor Wen dies, Dou's son takes the throne, Emperor Jing. And this is where most palace women lose their influence. The son listens to his own advisors now. Except Jing doesn't, because Dou isn't whispering in his ear. She's already in his mind. She raised him on Taoist philosophy. She chose his tutors. She curated every text he ever read. By the time he's emperor, he doesn't need her instructions. He already thinks the way she taught him to think. That's not influence, that's architecture. The court hates this, but here's the trap. How do you accuse someone of doing nothing? She holds no official title beyond Empress Dowager, a ceremonial role. She doesn't attend council meetings, she doesn't issue edicts. She just exists in her private quarters, reading, meditating. And somehow, policy after policy aligns with Taoist principles. Somehow, Confucian hardliners keep losing appointments. Somehow, the empire becomes quieter, softer, less aggressive. The ministers whisper, she's controlling him, but they can't prove it, because control that looks like philosophy isn't illegal. It's just unsettling. When Emperor Jing dies and her grandson Wu takes the throne, the court thinks, finally, she's too old now. Her time is over. Emperor Wu is young, ambitious, Confucian. He'll restore order. But Dou doesn't panic. She's already 30 years into this. She knows something the court has forgotten. The empire doesn't run on decrees. It runs on people. And she's spent 30 decades placing hers. Taoist advisors, governors, generals who owe her their careers. Wu can be as Confucian as he wants. The infrastructure is still hers. And then, in 1305 BCE, Empress Dowager Dou dies. Natural causes, old age, unremarkable. The court breathes. But here's the thing about soft power. It doesn't end with a heartbeat. Emperor Wu, now free, begins his purge. He doesn't kill Dou, she's already dead. He kills her network. Taoist officials are dismissed, reassigned, erased from record. Her allies disappear from court rosters like they were never there. And the Confucian order she spent 30 years dismantling, it comes roaring back. Wu becomes one of the most militaristic emperors in Chinese history. Everything Dou built collapses. So here's the question. If her power was real, why didn't it survive her? Because that's the trap of ruling without a throne. You can shape an empire, but you can't own it. The second you're gone, the men who resented you spend decades proving you were never necessary. They don't erase you loudly. They just stop saying your name, stop crediting your philosophy, stop teaching your influence. And within a generation, the woman who ruled the Han Dynasty for 30 years becomes a footnote, a concubine who got lucky, an old woman who read too much. But here's what they can't erase. For 30 years, Dou held an empire in her palm without ever closing her fist. And that's exactly why they had to destroy everything she touched. Because if a woman can rule that quietly, that completely, without a single decree in her name, what does that say about the men who needed armies and edicts and thrones to do the same?
What if I told you there's a worse fate than execution? Ingeborg of Denmark found out on her wedding night, and it lasted 20 years. August 14th, 1193, Amiens Cathedral, northern France. Ingeborg is 18 years old, Danish princess, blonde, educated, politically valuable. She's marrying Philip II, King of France, widower, crusader. This is supposed to be a triumph, an alliance between Denmark and France, a new queen, a fresh start. The ceremony is flawless. They say the vows, exchange the rings, the crown is placed, and then they go to the wedding chamber. The next morning, Philip refuses to see her. Not angry, not violent, just done. He calls his bishops, demands an annulment. Ingeborg, still wearing yesterday's wedding gown, doesn't understand. She speaks no French yet. No one will translate. All she knows is that her husband, the king, is standing in front of the papal court saying, "I cannot bear to look at her." That's it. No accusation of adultery, no claim of witchcraft, no political betrayal. Just revulsion. He won't say why. Historians still don't know. But here's what we do know. Ingeborg refuses the annulment. She stands in that court, 18 years old, in a foreign country, surrounded by men who want her gone, and says one word: no, no. She is queen. The marriage is valid. The Pope himself witnessed it. And Philip panics, because she's right. An annulment needs grounds, consanguinity, impotence, prior contract. He has none. He just wants her gone. But Ingeborg won't disappear, so Philip does the next best thing. He buries her. Not in a grave, in a convent, Saint-Maur-des-Fossés, just outside Paris. It's not a prison, technically. It's a royal residence. She's not a prisoner, technically. She's in seclusion. But the doors are locked, the windows face stone walls, and no one is allowed to visit without the king's permission. 1 year passes. Ingeborg writes to the Pope. Her letter is calm, almost formal. She doesn't beg, she doesn't accuse, she just states facts. I am the Queen of France. I have been confined without cause. I ask for justice. The Pope writes back. He tells Philip, release her. Philip ignores him. 2 years pass. Ingeborg writes again. This time, the Pope threatens excommunication. Philip remarries anyway, a German princess named Agnes. The Pope is furious. He places all of France under interdict. No sacraments, no weddings, no Christian burials. Philip waits him out. The interdict lasts 9 months. Then the Pope lifts it, because kings don't break before churches do, and Ingeborg is still locked in Saint-Maur. 15 years pass, then 10. The letters stop, not because she gives up, but because no one responds anymore. Imagine this. You wake up in the same room every day, the same stone walls, the same narrow bed. You are 28 years old. You have been queen for 10 years. You have never held court, never worn your crown in public, never been addressed by your title except in letters you write to yourself. You are not allowed to leave. You are not allowed visitors. You are not accused of anything. You are simply inconvenient, and the world has moved on. Philip's new wife has given him heirs. France is stable. Your brother, the King of Denmark, sends letters occasionally, but he won't go to war over you. The Pope sends condolences, but no aid. You are alive, and that is your punishment. 15 years pass. Philip's second wife, Agnes, dies. Suddenly, the king has a problem. His children, his heirs, are illegitimate because his marriage to Agnes was never valid, because he's still legally married to Ingeborg, and now he needs her. In 1213, 20 years after the wedding, Philip sends for her. She is brought to court, not as a prisoner, as queen. She is dressed in royal garments, seated beside him, presented to the court as if nothing ever happened. Philip does not apologize. He does not explain. He just pretends. And Ingeborg, 38 years old now, half her life spent in confinement, plays along. Because what choice does she have? She lives another 23 years, as queen in title, but Philip barely speaks to her. She has no children, no influence, no role except to exist, to legitimize his heirs, to prove he was always married, to be visible proof that the last 20 years didn't happen. When she dies in 1236, the chroniclers call her pious. They say she spent her life in prayer. They don't mention the convent that was a prison. They don't mention the letters that went unanswered. They don't mention that she said no to a king, and he spent 2 decades making her disappear without killing her. Because here's the thing about Ingeborg, she survived. And that's supposed to be the happy ending, right? But survival isn't triumph when it's your punishment, when the palace can't execute you, because the Pope is watching, because your family might object, because it would look bad. They do something worse. They let you live, locked away, stripped of purpose, frozen in time, a queen in name, a ghost in practice. Execution ends you, but this makes you watch yourself end, 1 year at a time, until even you start to forget who you were supposed to be.
Here's a rule they never wrote down. You can have power, you can even flaunt it, but the moment people start saying your name, you're already dead. The French court. Charles VII is king, but barely. France is losing the 100 Years' War. The English control half the kingdom. The nobility despises him. His own mother called him illegitimate. He's weak, indecisive, humiliated. And then there's Agnes. Agnes Sorel, daughter of minor gentry, 22 years old. She arrives at court as a lady-in-waiting, decorative, educated, unremarkable. Except Charles notices her, not just as a mistress, as the first person who makes him feel like a king. And here's where the story is supposed to go. Beautiful woman seduces weak king, gains jewels, titles, estates, lives in luxury, fades into footnote. But that's not what happens, because Agnes becomes visible. Most royal mistresses hide, private apartments, discreet entrances, gifts delivered quietly. Agnes sits beside the king at state dinners. She wears gowns so extravagant the church writes complaints. She commissions portraits of herself, bare-shouldered, crowned, holding the infant Jesus. One painting shows her breast exposed. In a royal chapel, the bishops lose their minds. But here's what they miss. While the court is scandalized by her neckline, she's whispering about military reform. While priests write sermons about her vanity, she's funding the army that will push the English out of France. She convinces Charles to appoint new commanders, to stop negotiating and start fighting. And it works. Between 1444 and 1450, France wins battle after battle. The English retreat. Charles, the king everyone mocked, becomes Charles the Victorious, and everyone knows why. Not the generals, not the advisors. Agnes. Here's the problem. When a king succeeds, it's divine right. When his mistress succeeds, it's witchcraft. The church calls her a succubus, a Jezebel, a demon in silk. One bishop writes, she parades her sin as if it were virtue. She flaunts her influence as if it were her right. Notice what he doesn't say, that she's wrong, that her advice is bad, that France is losing.
The crime isn't incompetence, it's visibility. Agnes is 28, pregnant with her fourth child, at the height of her influence. The war is nearly won. And then, in February, she falls ill. Stomach pain, fever, vomiting, delirium. The court physicians are baffled. She dies within days. Charles is devastated, commissions a tomb in white marble, calls her the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. Official cause of death, dysentery. Tragic, natural, unfortunate. But dysentery is slow. You waste away over weeks. Agnes died in days. One doctor notes, her suffering was unlike any natural illness I have witnessed. And then, nothing. Case closed. Except 560 years later, in 2005, French scientists exhume her remains. Academic routine, burial restoration, and then they test her hair. Mercury, massive quantities, enough to kill her 10 times over. The distribution pattern tells the story. It was consumed regularly, over weeks, in doses small enough not to be immediately lethal until they were. Someone fed Agnes Sorel poison, slowly, carefully, and watched her die. Who did it? We'll never know for certain, but look at who benefited. The church? She was their greatest scandal. The nobility? She had more influence than them combined. The Dauphin? Charles's own son? He despised her, publicly prayed for her death. After she dies, he becomes the king's chief advisor. Years later, as Louis XI, he's asked about her. He says, "My father kept a woman who poisoned his dignity." Poisoned. Interesting word choice. But here's what haunts me. It doesn't matter who held the vial. The palace killed her. The system that says you can whisper to the king in private, but the moment you sit beside him in public, the moment your name is spoken with his, you've crossed a line that was never visible until you're already dying. Agnes Sorel turned a humiliated king into a conqueror. She funded armies, shaped policy, changed the course of a war, and her reward? Mercury in her wine. A tomb that calls her beautiful but never brilliant. A legacy that remembers her gowns but not her strategies. Because here's the thing, if you hide power, you're ineffective. If you display it, you're dangerous. And danger? The palace has a cure for that. Agnes Sorel was a candle, and the palace did what palaces do to flames that burn too high. They snuffed her out, quietly, efficiently, before anyone could ask why the room suddenly got so dark.
What happens when a woman stops pretending? When she takes the title, signs the decrees, stamps her name on the coins. Let me show you. It takes 80 days. Egypt. The 7th Crusade is at Cairo's gates. King Louis IX of France commands the largest Christian army seen in decades. They've already taken Damietta. They're marching toward the capital. And the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Salih Ayyub, is dying. Tuberculosis, lung infection, bleeding internally. He has weeks, maybe days. His wife, Shajar al-Dur, is at his bedside. Former slave, Turkish origin, brilliant. She's been his confidant for years, the one he trusts with state secrets, military intelligence, treasury access. But trust is one thing. What she does next is something else entirely. The Sultan dies, and Shajar al-Dur hides the body. Not for hours, for months. She has servants bring meals to his chamber. She forges his signature on military orders. She responds to generals in his voice, dictating letters, issuing commands, approving troop movements. The army is fighting a crusade, and they have no idea their sultan is a corpse. Why? Because if the Mamluks, the elite slave soldiers who run Egypt's military, find out the sultan is dead, they'll fracture. Generals will fight for succession, alliances will collapse, and Louis IX will walk into Cairo unopposed. So Shajar does the only thing that makes sense. She becomes the Sultan. not in title, in function. She runs the war herself. And she wins. April 1250, Battle of Faraskor. The Egyptian forces destroy the Crusader army. King Louis IX is captured. His ransom is so massive it bankrupts France. It's one of the most decisive Muslim victories of the Crusades. And the woman who orchestrated it? Still pretending to be a dead man's secretary. But here's the problem. You can't hide a victory. The Mamelukes want to celebrate. They want to see their sultan. So Shajar does something extraordinary. She tells the truth. She announces that al-Salih has been dead for months, that she commanded the campaign, that she won the war. The Mamluks are stunned, but they're also pragmatic. She delivered victory, stability, a captive crusader king. So they do something no Muslim state has done before. They proclaim her sultan, not regent, not queen consort, sultan. May 1250. Shajar al-Durr's name is inscribed on coins. Her title is read in Friday prayers across Egypt. She holds court, commands armies, signs treaties. For 80 days, a woman rules one of the most powerful empires in the Islamic world, not hidden behind a curtain, not whispering through a son or husband, as herself. And the world loses its mind. The Caliph in Baghdad, the highest religious authority in Sunni Islam, sends a letter. It's short, brutal. If you have no men capable of ruling, we will send you one. The neighboring emirs refuse to recognize her authority. The religious scholars issue fatwas calling her reign illegitimate. Not because she's incompetent, because she's visible. A woman's name on a coin is blasphemy. A woman leading prayers is heresy. A woman commanding men? Unthinkable. The Mamluks, the same men who proclaimed her, start to panic, because Egypt's legitimacy depends on recognition from Baghdad. Its trade depends on alliances with neighboring states. Its stability depends on the clergy not inciting rebellion. And all of that is collapsing, not because Shajar is failing, because she's ruling. So they come to her with a solution. Marry a Mamluk general. Transfer power to him. Step back into the shadows. You can still advise, still influence. Just stop being sultan. Shajar agrees. She marries Aibek, a general, a former slave, politically neutral. She abdicates. He becomes sultan. On paper. But here's what actually happens. Shajar keeps governing. She attends councils, issues orders through Aibek, controls the treasury. Same power, different title. It's the compromise. The palace gets the male figurehead. She gets to keep running the empire. For 7 years, it works. Until Aibek starts believing his own title. He wants to marry a second wife, a princess from Mosul, a political alliance. Shajar is furious. Not because of jealousy, because a second wife means a second power base. It means Aibek stops needing her. It means she becomes optional. April 1257. Shajar invites Aibek to her private bath. He goes. He doesn't come back. Her servants beat him to death in the bathwater. It's messy, desperate, obvious. Shajar tries to cover it up, claims he died of illness. But the Mamluks aren't stupid. They know what happened. And now she's not just a woman with power. She's a murderer. Aibek's Mamluks storm her palace. They don't arrest her. They don't try her. They drag her to the harem, and they give her to Aibek's first wife. What happens next isn't an execution. It's rage. Aibek's wife beats Shajar to death with her own hands, with wooden clogs. The historical accounts describe it in detail, the blows, the screaming, the blood on marble floors. They don't call it murder. They call it justice. When it's over, they throw Shajar's body over the palace wall, naked, into a ditch. She lies there for days before anyone collects her. No state funeral, no tomb inscribed with her victories, no mention of the crusade she won or the empire she saved. Just a broken body in the dirt. Because here's the thing. Shajar al-Dur ruled Egypt, defeated a crusader king, saved an empire from collapse,
And for 80 days, she did it with her own name on the throne. That's not a crime. That's a warning. The palace will let you whisper. It will let you influence. It will even let you win. But the second you stop pretending a man is in charge, the second your name replaces his on the coins, you've committed the unforgivable sin. You've proven they were never necessary. And they will make sure you die knowing it. Not quietly, not with dignity, not in a way that lets history call you a martyr. They'll make it brutal, humiliating, public, so that every woman who comes after you remembers, you can have the power, you just can't claim it. Shajar al-Durr's body was eventually buried. Centuries later, they found her tomb. Simple, unmarked. Tourists walk past it every day without knowing, because that's the final punishment. Erasure. She defeated crusaders, ruled an empire, changed the course of history, and all they left her with was a ditch and a warning. Stay hidden or die loud.
4 women, 4 centuries, 4 continents. Let me show you something. When Empress Dowager Dou died, what did they say about her? They didn't. They erased her philosophy, dismantled her network, removed her people from the records. But they never accused her of anything. Because how do you accuse someone of what exactly? Reading? Advising? Thinking? So they did something smarter. They made her disappear from memory. No trial, no charge, just silence. As if 30 years of influence never happened. Now look at Ingeborg. What was she accused of? Nothing. Philip didn't claim she was unfaithful, didn't call her a witch, didn't say she was barren. He just said he couldn't bear to look at her. That's not a crime. That's a feeling. And somehow a feeling was enough to bury a queen for 20 years. Agnes Sorel? Oh, they had words for her. Jezebel, succubus, corrupter. But read what they actually wrote. She flaunts her influence as if it were her right. She parades her position without shame. Notice what's missing? They don't say her advice is wrong. They don't say France is losing. The crime isn't incompetence. It's visibility. She acted like power was something she deserved to hold. And for that, Mercury. And Shajar al-Durr. The caliph's letter is still preserved. If you have no men, we will send you one. Not, you're unqualified. Not, you lost the war. She won the war. But she committed a greater sin. She stopped pretending a man did it. Her name on the coins was the crime, not her competence, her audacity. So what do these accusations have in common? Immorality, corruption, heresy, unseemliness. These are the words. But what's the actual charge? What did Dou do that was threatening? She governed without anyone noticing she was governing. What did Ingeborg do? She refused to disappear when ordered. What did Agnes do? She let people see her influence. What did Shajar do? She claimed authority publicly. Strip away the language. Strip away immorality and corruption and heresy. What's left? Autonomy. That's the crime. Not what they did, what they were. Women who acted as if power was theirs to hold. Not borrow, not receive, not channel through a man. Hold. And here's the trap. The palace can't say that, because we're killing you for being autonomous. Sounds like tyranny. So they use other words. Words that sound moral, religious, structural. She corrupted the king. She violated natural order. She brought shame to the throne. These aren't accusations. They're translations. The real sentence is always the same. She forgot her place. But here's what makes it genius. The palace doesn't have to prove these charges. You can't defend yourself against unseemliness. You can't disprove corruption of dignity. These are feelings dressed as facts, and feelings don't require evidence. They require consensus. And the consensus is always the same. A woman with visible power is unnatural.
A woman who doesn't defer is dangerous. A woman who succeeds without a man's name attached, that's witchcraft, even if no one says the word. Look at the pattern. Dou ruled for 30 years. No one stopped her while she was useful. The purge didn't begin until she was dead. Ingeborg was crowned queen, legally, publicly, with papal blessing. But the moment she stopped being wanted, none of that mattered. She was locked away, not because she did anything wrong, but because her existence was inconvenient. Agnes was celebrated. The king loved her. France was winning. But the moment her visibility outshone the king's, poison. Not because she failed, because she succeeded too loudly. Shajar won a war, saved an empire, ruled for 80 days. The empire didn't collapse, but her name on a coin was unforgivable. Not her leadership, her credit. Do you see it now? The palace doesn't kill women for failing. It kills them for succeeding without permission. And here's the cruelest part. There is no amount of competence that earns you safety. Dou was brilliant, erased. Ingeborg was obedient, buried. Agnes was invaluable, poisoned. Shajar was victorious, beaten to death. It doesn't matter what you do. It matters what you are. Because the palace has a rule, never written, never spoken, but every woman in power learns it. You can have influence. You just can't be influential. You can shape decisions. You just can't make them. You can win wars. You just can't take credit. And the moment you cross that line, the moment you stop hiding, stop deferring, stop pretending, the accusations start. Not about what you did, about what you are. But here's the question no one asks. If these women were so dangerous, why did the empires function perfectly well under their leadership? Because they weren't dangerous. The palace was terrified of what it meant if they succeeded. If a woman can govern as well as a man, better even, without a title, without an army, without a throne, what does that say about the men who needed all three? So they don't kill these women for failing. They kill them for proving something, for showing that power doesn't require a crown, that competence doesn't require a Y chromosome. And the palace can't allow that proof to stand. Because if one woman can rule without pretending, others might stop pretending too. So they don't just kill the woman, they kill the idea. They erase her name from records. They attribute her work to men. Anything except what she actually was. Capable. 4 women, 4 empires, 4 methods of execution. Erasure, imprisonment, poison, violence. But only one crime. They acted like power was theirs to hold.
Let me tell you about a rule that has no author, no decree, no date of origin, but every woman who ever held power learned it, usually right before she lost everything. The palace operates on a principle. Power is allowed until it's no longer needed. Not wanted, needed. Think about when each woman was destroyed. Empress Dowager Dou, after she died and couldn't be useful anymore. Ingeborg, the moment Philip secured a second wife and heirs. Agnes Sorel, when France's victory was certain and her visibility became embarrassing. Shajar al-Dur, 80 days after she saved the empire and stability returned. Notice the timing. None of them were killed during the crisis, while the empire was weak, while the king was uncertain, while the war was raging. They were tolerated, sometimes even celebrated. But the moment the emergency passed, the moment the palace no longer needed their competence, that's when they became dangerous. Because here's what the palace understood. A woman's power is only acceptable when it's temporary, when it's an exception to the rule, not a challenge to it. You can rule during a crisis as long as you disappear when it ends. You can advise a weak king as long as he vanishes when he becomes strong. You can hold the empire together as long as you don't ask to be remembered for it. This isn't cruelty, it's strategy. The palace doesn't kill out of hatred, It kills out of precedent. Because if Dou's philosophy can sustain an empire for 30 years, what stops the next woman from trying? If Ingeborg can refuse an annulment and stay queen, what stops others from saying no? If Agnes can sit beside the king and fund armies, what makes the next mistress hide? If Shajar can put her name on coins and rule openly, what's left of the argument that women can't? Every successful woman in power is a blueprint, and blueprints are more dangerous than armies. So the palace doesn't just remove her, it dismantles the possibility of her. Erases the records, rewrites the narrative, ensures that her success looks like an anomaly, not a capability. Makes sure that history remembers her beauty, her tragedy, her immorality, anything except her competence. Because competence is contagious. And here's the brilliance of it. The palace doesn't have to convince you she was evil. It just has to make you uncertain. Was Dou really that influential, or did historians exaggerate? Was Ingeborg imprisoned, or just in seclusion for her own protection? Did Agnes really shape policy, or was she just a privileged mistress? Did Shaja really rule, or was she just a figurehead between sultans? You see what they did? They don't erase her completely. They just add doubt. And doubt is enough. Because once you're unsure whether she was powerful or just pretty, whether she was brilliant or just lucky, she stops being a model. She becomes a cautionary tale. And cautionary tales don't inspire revolution. They inspire compliance. Now here's the uncomfortable part. This rule didn't die with medieval palaces. It just changed buildings. Today, we don't call it a palace. We call it a boardroom, a cabinet, a studio, a stage. But the rule is identical. Power is allowed until it's no longer needed. A woman can lead during a crisis, but when stability returns, there's always a man better suited for the long term. A woman can be the loudest voice in the room until someone decides she's too aggressive or difficult to work with. A woman can build an empire, but if she takes credit too loudly, she's self-promoting. If she's too visible, she's attention-seeking. If her success outshines the men around her, she's a problem. We don't use Mercury anymore. We use leaked emails, whisper campaigns, sudden restructuring. We don't lock women in convents. We put them on indefinite leave or encourage them to spend more time with family. We don't erase them from records. We just stop inviting them to meetings, stop crediting their contributions, stop saying their names until everyone forgets they were ever essential. Same rule, different vocabulary. And just like the palace, it's not personal, it's structural. The system doesn't hate women. It just can't afford to let them prove they're not optional. Because here's the truth the palace has always known. If women can hold power during a crisis, they can hold it during peace. If they can govern in secret, they can govern in public. If they can rule without a title, they never needed the title in the first place. And if they never needed it, what does that say about the men who demand it? So the palace makes a choice, not a hateful one, a calculated one. It allows women power in controlled doses, temporary windows, deniable forms. And the moment that power is no longer necessary, it eliminates the evidence that it ever worked. Not because the women failed, because they succeeded. And success is the most dangerous thing a woman can carry in a palace. Empress Dowager Dou governed an empire for 30 years without a throne. Ingeborg of Denmark survived 20 years of imprisonment without breaking. Agnes Sorel turned a coward into a king and won a war. Shajar al-Dur defeated crusaders and ruled as sultan. They didn't whisper, they didn't hide, they didn't wait for permission, and every single one of them paid for it. But here's what the palace couldn't kill: the fact that they did it, that they held power, that they succeeded, that they proved beyond any doubt that competence has no gender. You can erase a name from a record, you can rewrite a history, you can poison a woman,
bury her alive, lock her away, beat her to death, but you can't erase what she proved. And that's why the palace had to be so brutal. That's why the punishment had to be so complete, because if even one woman's success was remembered clearly, accurately, undeniably, the entire system collapses. The palace didn't destroy these women because they were weak. It destroyed them because they proved they weren't. And somewhere, in a boardroom or a palace or a hall of power you'll never see, that rule is still being written, still being enforced, still waiting for the next woman who forgets to stay quiet. The palace is patient. It always has been. It can wait for you to be useful, and it can wait for you to become dangerous. The question is, will you notice the difference before it's too late?